Good afternoon. This is Marcos Bertone, columnist with the Sacramento Bee, and we want to welcome you to the latest edition of our Wednesday conversation with Mayor Darrell Steinberg. Mayor, how are you?
I'm doing great, Marcos. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. Let's get right into it. All right. So we opened up, and the first image that struck me was the crowds of people at the American River, not socially distancing, not wearing masks. And the first thought that I had was, are we going to look back on this 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now with regret?
I had the same thought. Look, I think when I evaluate the weekend, there were a lot of positives. I think our restaurants largely did a good job trying to maintain the right kinds of protocols, the distancing within the restaurants themselves. I think that there was a lot of real-time education going on between the city, between the heads of the business associations and the individual businesses. So I think that was a good start. I was bothered by the crowds that I saw, especially in Discovery Park, where the county ended up having to shut it down for all the obvious reasons. It is so easy and wrong to get too comfortable with the fact that the stay-at-home orders have been relaxed, and for all the good and right reasons. The fact that it is hot and that people, yes, are trying to enjoy themselves and blow off steam after months living in a very, very different way. But we must not get too comfortable. We can, in fact, enjoy ourselves. We can, in fact, open up if we do it in the right way. And what I saw in some parts of the city and the county this weekend did bother me, and I think that has to change.
Going forward, if it happens again, what do we do? Do we shut it down? We just keep shutting down the beach until we achieve what?
Well, again, some of this is in county jurisdiction, but I do think that there need to be size limits, for example, a number of cars that can park, and the number of people that are allowed in a by definition discrete geographical location, because 6 feet is 6 feet, and we either mean it or we don't. And if we mean it, and if we believe that continuing with that physical distancing is an essential part of giving us the assurance that we can continue to open and reopen, then what is the choice but to limit the numbers of people that can congregate in any one area? And so lessons learned, and I know that everyone at the county level, at city level, we're all talking about the same things. I have some thoughts about what the city might want to do going forward in this regard. But certainly every opportunity I get, I'm going to say that it should be the expectation, if not the requirement, the absolute requirement, that we follow these guidelines much more strictly, because and take whatever heat comes with that, because I'm like you. I want to be able to look back a month from now and say that we did over the next month what we did in the first 2 months, and that is do the right things to flatten the curve and not have more people sick or dying than has already occurred.
So listen, and I preface this by saying that I have friends in the hospitality business, and my heart goes out to them. And I've been worried about them very much in the last 2 months. But I have to say that some of the photos I saw in my publication and on other outlets showed, large crowds in confined spaces in restaurants in the city as well. Did those trouble you?
Yes, that troubles me. And here's the other thing that I heard about some of the experience of the restaurateurs. even where they said, we are asking you customers to wear a mask while you're waiting for your food or while you're congregating outside waiting to come into our restaurant, that some of the restaurateurs actually got some significant resistance from the customers. Mm-hmm. So there are cases where the businesses want to do the right thing, are doing the right thing, but their customers are giving them a bad time for doing the right thing. And so it begs that broader question again. Should the guidance from the county and or the city be a little bit more clear and a little bit more firm? Look, I think the county has done a fabulous job. I really do. And I think Peter Bielenson has done a fabulous job. The city and the county are different. Different political cultures, frankly. Let's be honest about it. Out in parts of the county, they don't necessarily think the same way we do in the city. And that's okay. We're the blue city where our politics tend to be more progressive. I hear from a lot more people who say, we would like you, Mayor, to be even more outspoken about the need for strict physical distancing and for required masks. Now, I called for mandatory masks a couple of weeks ago.
Didn't do it.
The county comes out with its order, and it uses, and I have it right in front of me here, it's a very good order actually, but it uses the term should when it comes to masks and to face coverings. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at that, I actually understand why from a county perspective they would do that, because cities within the county are different. The unincorporated county is different. Again, the politics and the culture is different. But I'm beginning to ask a different question, which is, why shouldn't the city itself, using its own police powers, have a more strict requirement when it comes to the mask issue, for example? What if, for example, we substituted the word should in this county order and substituted should for shall? Mm-hmm. When it comes to required masks. Now, this is a reasonable, whether it should or shall, the context and the nuance, I think, is very well done. What they say here with should, and I might say shall, is that if you are indoors in a setting with other people and you can't distance by 6 feet, you must wear a mask. Now, for restaurants, of course, you'd be able to take off your mask when you actually ate your meal. But for every other place of business, including restaurants when you're not eating, if you can't distance 6 feet, you got to wear a mask. They talk about outdoors and they say, okay, well, if you're running, you're hiking, you're walking, and you can maintain the distance, you don't have to wear a mask. That's reasonable. If, however, you can't maintain the distance, you should wear a mask. And you should always carry one with you in case you get into a situation where you find yourself within close proximity of other people. The county wrote all of that, I thought, in a very nuanced and appropriate way, but said should. I'm now asking the question, should the city substitute shall for should? And should we impose a reasonable mask requirement in our city? I'm thinking about it, but I am close to going that next step and asking my colleagues for that kind of a decision. Now, would I expect to get a lot of flack from some people? Yes, but this is the way I look at it. Can I?
Please
go on here. This is the way I look at it. I look at it like very logically. You hear Dr. Fauci today say very clearly, wearing masks is about public health, but it's also about respect for one another. We know that masks are not foolproof, but the science is clear. They do reduce the chance that you will spread the virus because of the way the virus is spread. So I go back to basic logic. If X percent of the people in the city of Sacramento now are wearing masks voluntarily, and if we make it a shall, a mandate, again, with the same reasonableness that's contained within the county order. Can we increase the use of masks from X to X plus? And if we increase that percentage from X to X plus, even if we don't have a strict or hard enforcement kind of regimen, and more people are wearing masks, doesn't it make it more likely then that we will reduce the potential for the spread of the virus in the city of Sacramento? And if the answer to that question is yes, then I want to do it, because I want to look back and say, we did everything possible. And what I don't want is to not do it, and then to see 14 days from now, and by the way, the 14 days of incubation the clock starts every hour, 2 weeks forward. I don't want to look back and say, oh my God, if we had only done this additional protection, that people would not have gotten sick and that we would not have seen a spike. There's a lot we don't know. For all we know, the Discovery Park experience of last weekend will mean nothing in the end. But we don't know that.
We won't know that.
Are we going to play Russian roulette with people? I don't think we should.
So here are a couple thoughts come to mind. First of all, this whole talk, the headline of it was, is wearing a mask political? And it should not be. It should not be political, but it is political. Where you have, last weekend, I was in a boba tea establishment with one of my children. We were both wearing masks. Other people came in wearing masks, and listen, it was awkward, and the person, one of the people who was not wearing a mask, was like seemingly trying to make eye contact with me as if somehow I was doing something wrong. And so I don't enjoy wearing a mask, particularly when it's hot, but I'm trying to not pass this on to other people. But so the whole idea is preposterous to me. But here is the, and obviously it hasn't been, the idea of tightening the language for the city obviously still needs to be discussed publicly, and I'm very happy that we're discussing it first in this platform. My only concern with that, because I agree with making it more stringent, but that would have to go, as a citizen, it seems to me that would have to go hand in hand with the understanding among police officers that we do not want to have this end up in like a black person getting beaten up with a billy club because he sassed a police officer because he wasn't wearing a mask. And that would be the concern that I would raise, that clearly we need to focus on this stuff, but we also need to have the law enforcement apply it in a judicious way that doesn't end up spinning out of control and having another situation that we regret later on.
I agree with you that is a real concern, and I think we need to acknowledge it. And I've heard that from at least one of my African-American colleagues on the city council. Here's the way I look at enforcement. I would be very clear from the very beginning that enforcement would be a very light touch at most, where there was a flagrant violation with large groups of people gathering again in a public place, not distancing and not wearing a mask, or a crowded place of business where people were not wearing a mask. I would of course first educate and then warn, and maybe in a couple of instances to issue the citations to say that we are taking this seriously. But I would not put the onus on our police officers or even our code enforcement officers to make this an enforcement regimen. This would be about trying to set an expectation. And this, again, is my belief. I don't know what percentage of people, I'll take away the X here, okay? I don't know what percentage of people are currently wearing masks in the settings that we are talking about. But let's just throw it out and estimate, and let's say it's about 30%. We make this mandatory, and we educate, and we create the appropriate social pressure, and we create the expectation, let's say that number goes up to 60%, and there's still 40% of the people who are following it loosely or not at all. That's still a doubling of the number of people who are wearing the protective equipment in a way that gives us a better chance to keep more people safe and to reduce the potential of the spread of the virus. And so to me, you're always working with percentages here. And of course, God, look at what we've learned over the last number of months about the percentages, about how to minimize risk, about how we know that we're doing well if individual A, who has the virus, has only spread it to less than one person as opposed to one or more people. I mean, all of this now has been analyzed. And what we know for a fact is that wearing this more often in the public setting makes the chances better that the virus will not spread as fast. Why wouldn't we take the imperfect?
I mean, I honestly don't. I'm having a difficult time understanding why it's so difficult to understand when there's so much information available to us. For example, just in the news today, Dr. Sarah Cody, the county health officer in Santa Clara County,
right,
who she was accused of being an extremist early on, but it turns out that her opinions of shutting things down that saved lives in Santa Clara County, where I'm from originally, and she sounded the alarm today that she thinks that California is moving too fast and loosening too much. What she didn't say, but what she might have said is perhaps California is bowing to pressure and opening like houses of worship based on statements that the president of the United States might have made or based on actions that Elon Musk took. And at the same time, Lassen County, a rural county, has all of a sudden slammed on the brakes because they have begun getting their first legitimate cases. And all of a sudden, the light bulb is going on up there like, hey, if unless we contain this thing, it starts to become an issue. And my fear is, as I stated here, is that we are going to deeply regret moving too fast within a couple of weeks. And then at that point, there'll be a lot of people pointing fingers when they might have been the same people who were advocating that we open up.
Let us mandate a strong but reasonable mask requirement in the city of Sacramento. Let's reduce the chance of the exact scenario that you just described that I, as the mayor of this city, am also worried about. Because I would rather err on the side of being a little over diligent, a little bit over prescriptive for a limited period of time if it helps assure that we can get through this next phase, and we are in a new phase, this reopening phase, safer than not.
But do you think we're going too fast too soon?
I honestly don't think there was another choice. I'll be honest. I really don't.
Because of the pressure, the public pressure brought to bear.
Here's what I really think. And now I'll be political for a moment. I think this has been such an abysmal failure of national leadership that the scientists, the public health experts told us from the very beginning that until we have either a vaccine, which is a ways off, or adequate diagnostic testing to scale, a national program for contact tracing, and an antibody test, we cannot scientifically say which cohort of people need to be isolated for 2 weeks, which cohort of people can return to work while watching their symptoms, and which cohort of people have already had the virus and have developed the antibodies and thus are relatively free to go back without restriction. Because we did not have that sort of national commitment, which can only occur nationally, in part because we have open borders among and between states and among and between cities and counties. What we are left with as a state is to engage in a series of controlled experiments, not frivolously, because the stakes in keeping society and the economy closed for indefinitely was also not just an economic issue, but a public health issue as well. That whether we opened last week or a month from now, it would be the same and we would face the same risks. So that it comes back to this question of what can we control to protect ourselves as we do what is necessary, and that is to reopen. And that's the question I think we have gotten too comfortable ignoring. And we see that play out in some parts of our community. It's not just our community, by the way. Look at Missouri, look at other parts of the country and what was reported over the Memorial Day weekend. Let's get real, people, that we can in fact have it both ways. You can enjoy freedom again and what you like to do, so long as you're willing to embrace the new awkward. That's what I call it, the new awkward. Let's embrace it. So what? It is a minor inconvenience in comparison to what is at stake, not just for the public health, but for the continued ability to be able to bring people back to work and to open up our economy again.
I feel like we almost have to do given the times that we live in, like a marketing campaign.
We do.
Social media. And the one that I envision would be a scene in a restaurant where some person is berating a hardworking server who has asked that person kindly, respectfully to wear a mask. Because I'm hearing stories from people I know who work in hospitality, and their people are just getting berated by people who either for political reasons don't want to wear a mask, or they're frustrated after 2 months inside. And listen, I'm frustrated too. I understand that, but don't scream at your wait person. Don't scream at the clerk at the supermarket. I mean, it's almost like we have to do a campaign about that people are asking you to wear a mask for a reason, and that it's terrible if you take that out on the person who asked you to do it.
I do think that tone matters. I do think that scolding people or shaming them does not work. But I also think that the answer to the plight of the waiter or waitress who receives that kind of abuse is to blame it on the city or blame it on your mayor, because the city imposed a strong but reasonable requirement. And then the waiter or the waitress or the hostess can say, this is now a city requirement. We should not put working people who are just doing their best to make a living in that position where they have to be the ones that feel like they're in the middle or have done something wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. We're trying to protect the public health here. And so that speaks even more to the reason to put it on the city. I'll take it because that's my job. And I'm responsible, as are my council colleagues, as is the city manager and our entire city, for the public health of our city residents. And again, I go back to just the very basics. When you take away all the politics, you take away all the argument, the culture. Is it more likely that if more people wear masks, that we're likely to have a better health and public health outcome? The answer is yes. Is it more likely that people will comply and wear masks if we make it a shall rather than a should? I think the answer to that is yes as well.
Were you surprised that the county ordinance was not more explicit?
I was not, and I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, and I'm not critical of them. They're a different political entity and a political body. The city of Sacramento is not the same as the unincorporated county, is not the same as the city of Folsom or the city of Elk Grove. They all have different political cultures. I may disagree with their stand on the mask issue, but I am responsible for the people of the city of Sacramento. And so we've really communicated very well. I've talked to the county officials today and, told them that I was thinking about this very subject and potentially going our own way as a city. And we will continue to communicate with them, but it's not a negative on them. They have a different political situation and a different culture, frankly, to deal with in the rest of the county than we do here in the city.
Well, what did you make of? You saw Sheriff Jones's view of what did you make of that?
I did not see that. What did he say exactly?
I don't want to misrepresent. Well.
I'm stating my point of view very clearly.
Where would I start, Mayor?
I speak to Mayor Steinberg and no others.
So before we go, and forgive me for springing this on you, and I should have asked this at the beginning. If we have any, last week when we spoke, our numbers were still very good with respect to the ICU and overall hospitalizations. And forgive me if you don't have them at hand. We can cover that the next time. But
I don't have the exact numbers at hand, but I know that we have.
Totally. Have you heard if there's been any?
No, we have not had an increase to worry about. But again, there's a 14-day incubation period. Last weekend is only 3 days ago. So I'm both enthusiastic about the opening and I also worry like hell. So
if we can just reset quickly based on what we discussed last time. Last week, so people understand, last week when we talked, there was a significant capacity that Sacramento County has significant cushion, as if you will, in that as of last week when we spoke, our people in the ICUs and people in overall hospitalizations was quite low compared to what it could be before it set off any sort of alarm bells. And so as far as you know, anecdotally, we are still doing very well in terms of not packing our hospitals with people who are sick.
We are, and that is worth celebrating for about 2 minutes. And then you ask the next question, what is it going to take to continue to have that kind of success? And that's what we're talking about here tonight.
Yeah. Have you been surprised that this has become a political football, in that there are some people who seem to take as a point of pride not wearing a mask and not social distancing? Has that been surprising to you, given that we're 100,000 plus who have died? It's the largest loss of life since World War II, and that yet somehow there's like a disconnect between that and some of the views that you're seeing expressed?
I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, but I am a little bit surprised because sometimes I think common sense should always prevail. If you're asking somebody for some great inconvenience to their lives, that maybe becomes a debatable point. Certainly this question of reopening and bringing people back to work and opening businesses, that's a real balance here. This becoming a symbol, I suppose, in this era of politics and culture that we live in, it is not surprising. It is certainly disappointing to me because I always like to go back to basic common sense. And what science tells us and what common sense tells us is that additional protection can only help. It can't hurt.
So let's wrap up with a couple of points. Let's say, and I mean this sincerely to everyone who's watching, if you're going to go to a public place, please be kind to your servers, to the clerks, to the working people who have suffered greatly in the last 2 months. Let's not vent our frustration and our political baggage at innocent people. Let's not do that. And I'm writing about this. So last week you and I rode together delivering food to elderly people, and I was really moved by the sense of grace that I've experienced talking with older people who have lived longer than we have. And I would say that we need to remember that this is a moment in time and that we need to show each other grace in this moment. So, Mayor, I appreciate your words very much. I look forward to talking to you next week. To all of you who tuned in, we appreciate it as well. This is Marcos Bertone of the Sacramento Bee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Marcos.